Okay, we have the technology. Here's a macro. The macro is it's time for the Internet of Things to start to take security seriously. And I hope during the next 20 minutes I'm going to try and persuade you out. A quick show of hands, how many people here are developing either devices or software for the Internet of Things? Hands up. Cool. That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to come back at the end to see if I've actually resonated. So, what I want to talk about... Aha, right. Oh, hello, someone has taken my dongle out of the thing. Industrial sabotage. Okay, let's try again. No, right, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. Okay, I want to quickly talk a little bit about some context and talk about some questions for you. I want to look about why security for the Internet of Things is going to become more important than it is now if you want to do business. And I emphasize that because actually security and the IoT, if you're not building security in, you're not going to get on people's platforms moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about each of the three components of IoT and how you secure those and what maturity looks like in the space. And I apologize for leaping backwards and forwards. So a little bit about me. I joined Microsoft 7 years ago after a career in the British government in security and intelligence. So I've sort of sat on both sides of the fence about the government regulatory side and the technology industry side. My role mostly involves helping governments make sense of emerging technologies and thinking about the security architecture that you need to do to balance innovation with security. So the IoT is something that I talk about a lot. So let's think about some context. Well, the first is, I'm not going to go through these slides. If you want to do business, it doesn't matter what sector you're in. If you don't embrace innovation, you will die. And I think it's a great figure at the bottom that the Fortune 500 in 1955, of the 500 companies, only 12% still existed in 2014. And there were a really interesting blend of companies, including technology companies that were on the list that aren't there now. And the ones that are probably a few, such as Boeing, who you probably would think of. But if you are going to innovate, and if you're going to use emerging technologies, and security is important to you or your customers, then you have to realize that you've just changed the security environment. So if you go back probably 15 years, how did you decide whether something was secure? Well, it was pretty easy. You could take a device and you got a security accrediting person in, and they would look at it and they would say, yes, I'm happy, and they'd put a seal on it that said, this is secure. And you'd be happy because you had a secure device. Well, the world's changed. So I'm wearing, with pride, my Microsoft band. My Microsoft band connects to my Windows Phone. My Windows Phone connects to about 4 related health apps, none of which are Microsoft's. Some of those health apps actually connect to hospital and medical systems, particularly in the US. So what's your perimeter look like now if you're securing that? Where do you define your perimeter to be? The concept of security environment and perimeter has been changed dramatically, to the point where defense is still really important, but actually response and detection become equally as important within your organization. And few organizations have made the change that goes with the changes to technology that they've introduced. And of course, coming back to the last question in the panel, if your security is poor, your privacy is poor too, because the data will be leaked and people's privacy will be infringed. So where does the IoT sit in this? And the answer is, not well. Most IoT instances, the baseline security is very poor. Why is that? Well, the first is that security is rarely designed into the devices side of IoT, even today. And it's interesting, I went in the break to have a chat to the teams who are doing the work for later, to look at what they're doing. You ask them the question, or look this afternoon at where security is featured in their thinking on what they're doing. And that's not a criticism, it's because it isn't in the mindset. And security, when it does become a business imperative, is often retrofitted into devices. And that never works well. Few applications and IoT devices are built using industry security practices or using existing standards or protocols. And often, open source libraries and components are used to download parts of an Internet of Things application. And those libraries are frequently consist of vulnerable code and vulnerable software. And the people who are building it don't understand the provenance or the interrelation between the software they're downloading and the system that they're actually connecting to. So is it a problem? Well, it's going to be, because cyber attacks are growing in scope and scale. Both hardware and software and networks, the three components of the Internet of Things, are all being challenged through cyber attacks. And whatever your organization is, there's probably one of those people on the slide who thinks you're a target. And getting it wrong, if you're a business, can not only be really expensive, but it can kill businesses. And there are businesses as far as large as Nortel Networks that were actually killed through cyber attack, who no longer effectively exist because their intellectual property was stolen and they never won a tender for 5 years for a significant project because they were always just underbid or just over-spec'd. And just having insurance in cyber isn't enough either, because cyber insurance has some limitations, and increasingly you need to be able to demonstrate a level of competence of security to be able to get that type of insurance. And it isn't just a data protection and privacy issue. Coming back to the industrial IoT panel, so what harm could an attacker do if they're in your infrastructure, if they could manipulate your connected equipment? And one of the case studies we've actually done in the health domain is if your drug is provided by a third-party provider and you're a hospital or a medic, and I can get in and remotely change the consistency or the makeup parts of that drug without you realizing it, where does the liability sit when you then administer that to your patients? What about if I could hijack that drone that we saw earlier on? What could I do with it? And whose liability would it be if I could? So, to those of you who run businesses, a rhetorical question. Where does this fit in your business risk register? Because if it isn't in your risk register at all, the answer is, if you are liable, you're going to really struggle when you have to justify how you got there. And when I do this talk to CEOs, I always ask the question, not rhetorically, how many people have actually got this explicitly as a business risk? Disruption of infrastructure, hacking of website. And the answer is very few indeed. So where are we going? Well, what's the economic case for you as developers in the Internet of Things to be thinking about this? Well, if you look at the UK government, the Cyber Essentials scheme in the UK government means if you want to be part of the supply chain for the UK Ministry of Defence, you have to prove your cyber credentials. You're going to see much more of that in the public sector. If you want to do business with us, Microsoft, we want to know that your cyber credentials are sound because we don't want you in our supply chain if they're not. So the reality is, actually, this is going to be a core part of getting and staying in business. And very few supply chain contracts have a security feature put in at all. And this is going to become a key business discriminator for the Internet of Things. If your stuff is secure, you may survive. If it isn't, you probably won't be able to do business. And it gets worse. So let's talk a little bit about the three parts of the Internet of Things. So we're talking about devices, networks, and the services at the back end. To be secure, you have to be coherent across all three of those parts. So if you're a device manufacturer, what are the security aspects of the device? So the first is you have to start thinking at the design level, not retrofitting, a number of things that your device is going to have to do. It needs to demonstrably protect the data. So if your device leaks data or sends data out in a way that isn't obvious or that isn't written in the specification, that's going to be a problem. You need to be able to authenticate. So you actually need to be able to say this device is legitimate, it's owned by, it has the right health checks to enable you to get on the device. And I'll show you in a couple of minutes some things that are going to make life difficult if you can't do that. And something that very few people do, actually document your configuration and what is the impact on the operating systems that you come up with. The next version of Windows, Windows 10, has a couple of parts that are going to make life difficult if you don't do this. Device Guard is basically a rooted in hardware application control that enterprises can introduce. And what that basically means is if your device doesn't meet a certain health criteria, then the organizations will be able to stop it connecting. And we also have a cloud application detection service which we build into that, which organizations will be able to say, okay, these are the thing, what is actually connecting to my network, and this is the ones I want to get through. So being able to prove your health at the design level is going to become important. So securing the network, well, the technologies already exist. So if you're an organization thinking about how you bring stuff into your organization, use a network access gateway. And the network access gateway can actually check what you're letting in and again do health checks. So if I log on to our corporate network from a device, the first thing it does is it says, is it up to date on security patches? And if it isn't, it will patch the device before it allows me to connect. So the technology exists to do it. Application whitelisting is one of the top 3 security solutions put out by almost every government. And of course, application whitelist means if your device, if your application does not meet the bar, then the application whitelist won't allow that to run. And you're going to see this starting to come into the consumer space as well, because I think there's going to be a demand by consumers to only run things that basically aren't going to steal their data or put them at risk. So again, this is a real impact for people who are designing. And what about the data? Well, if you're an organization, you need to understand what your high value assets are as an organization. And it may not be the things that cost you most to get. So if you're running a business, it could be your customer list. It could be the best and final offer that you're going to make or your tendering specification. But if you don't understand what that data is, you can't protect it. Because ultimately, if you're going to throw your organization open to data from a whole range of devices, you can't secure the whole organization. So you need to work out what your best data is, your best assets are, and secure that to a higher degree than the rest of your infrastructure. And have a robust backup strategy and a gold standard build to rebuild your infrastructure from if something goes wrong. Because the likelihood is it will. That's the life of where we're at in cyber attacks. You have to assume breach, that you're going to be compromised at some point, and having a response plan will get you out of it. And if you are going to go to a cloud solution, so we're a cloud provider, so you probably shouldn't listen to me about what makes a good cloud or a bad cloud. Do some due diligence, because not all cloud providers are the same. Not all cloud providers can tell you where the data is. Not all cloud providers have the same level of security. So get somebody to do due diligence on your behalf. And again, there are some good government guides about how to do that as part of who your cloud provider is going to be. So to conclude, the key here really is to strike the right balance between security and innovation. Because if you get your security too strong, yeah, sure, you may never be attacked, but you won't thrive in business. It's all about managing a risk. And actually, you have to go up to the high level in an organisation, public or private, to do that, because it's not an IT problem. This is about your business imperatives and the security you need to run that business. So there's not a binary solution. And there's a question, which is, who is advising you to do this? Because actually your own in-house IT department probably aren't the best, and the people you buy your technology from probably aren't the best either, because they both have a dog in the fight. But you can learn from other sectors. And there are some really good resources, and the one I always cite to people is the CESG 10 Steps to Cybersecurity. It is just as relevant in an Internet of Things context as it is in any other. And it's freely out there on the internet. It's very easy to read, and I highly recommend it. And what we see is that organisations that do review this at board level are better at it. They're not attacked successfully as often, and they respond far better to attacks when they are. And it has to be enshrined in policy. So, and here is a question, and you can put your hand up if you like or not. How many of your organisations, public or private, have a policy that says, when can your organisation remote into a computer or a device, a phone that you use as part of your business? Because, well, that's good. So a hand, that's always encouraging. A couple of hands. Because, you know, the time to have the policy in place is not when you're attacked. And when you're attacked, you then need to be able to say, wow, looks like Bob Hayes' computer's been compromised, but he's got all his family photographs on there as well, so we're going to remotely wipe it. It's actually something you have to socialise and get in place as part of it. And so security actually covers the whole breadth of the organisation. There are HR issues, there are finance issues and operational issues. So if you've left this to your IT department, you're going to struggle. So there is a real appetite for incorporating the Internet of Things into core business across all of the sectors that we deal with. But there's a real nervousness about the security impact of doing that. Part of the future for this is that the people who are developing and building IoT solutions put security higher up the stack than it is today. And ultimately, the tools and processes are no different for doing it in the rest of the industry. They exist, they just sort of haven't really come into this domain in the IoT as they probably should have done. So the way forward actually is relatively clear, and there are some business and economic imperatives that I think will mean if you don't do that, you probably won't survive. I'm happy to take questions for as long as Simon will allow me.
Well, you're just going to be impacting on Paul's talk, so take as long as you like. Okay.
Thank you so much, Simon.
I would say...
If there are any questions. Do we have any questions? But if not, that will make it very easy.
Yeah, I think we need to move on. Really.
Right, that's absolutely fine.
Cool.